Continuing to read from A Mountain in Tibet, from page 146. I really had no wish to run a Buddhist center. I'd spent years avoiding exactly that in Samiling. I was lazy, inexperienced, selfish, and reckless. Hardly even a Buddhist. Tenzin Chuni was almost as much of a spoiled brat as me. He was the son of an aristocratic family from Lhasa, who had entrusted his care to His Holiness the Karmapa. He didn't even speak English. But here we were, standing on the boardwalk as the water poured endlessly over the falls, suddenly in charge of $1 million project. I got back in the limousine and drove on to Toronto, feeling absolutely bemused. My life had just been turned upside down. As we drove, I remembered that I had wanted to do something to make my brother proud. Perhaps this would be my chance. 3 days later, our party arrived at Glasgow Airport for the European leg of Karmapa's tour. His Holiness had already made it plain to Tenzin and me that we would not be traveling on to mainland Europe with him. Once I had settled things in Samiling, the two of us would be heading back to the States to begin our work. The reality of this had started to sink in, and I was happy about it. I'd never been somebody who worries about how things will turn out. The ability to inhabit the present moment rather than projecting into an uncertain future or ruminating on the past is an essential skill in meditation. And this, at least, has always come naturally to me. I don't get stressed or worried. That said, even I was a little apprehensive as we approached airport security in Glasgow. How were we going to pass through with all those caged birds that the Karmapa had brought with him from the States? His Holiness felt a special affinity with birds. He had visited numerous pet shops during the course of our trip and bought many of them, with the intention of releasing them in his enormous aviary in Rumtek. But he didn't have permission to ship them. It was extraordinary that we had managed to get them this far, given that it was against airline regulations to travel with animals of any kind in the cabin. I couldn't understand how it was possible that nobody had remarked on the many cages. True, the birds had behaved extraordinarily well during the flight, but the cages were still visible to me, perched on the laps of various monks. It was as if the check-in staff and hostesses could not see them. Surely now we would be required to leave the birds behind. There were quarantine laws to stop animals from crossing international borders. Nobody said a word to us about it. The Karmapa simply strolled through with his habitual smile for everyone, while his attendants carried the birds in their specially made wooden cases. The creatures were silent, and then, as we emerged into the arrivals hall, I saw that Akong and a small group from Samiling had come to greet us. Others who were there that day told me that as the Karmapa walked towards them, they could see nothing but light emanating from him. They were entirely unaware of the cages full of exotic birds. His Holiness later told us that many of the creatures had been his students in previous lifetimes, and he simply had to rescue them. He truly was a miraculous man. When Akong heard from His Holiness the Karmapa about his plans for me, He went along with everything, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Sure enough, when we were alone, he said to me, "How can you promise to His Holiness that you will run the center when you can't even look after yourself?" I simply told him that I couldn't say no to the Karmapa, an answer he didn't seem to find reassuring. I think he was concerned that I would let His Holiness down and bring shame on the Kagyu tradition. I wasn't worried about that, or anything else. I was excited and already looking forward to leaving. I trusted that things would work out. And I felt I had no ties to cut in Scotland. My brother's lack of faith in me didn't surprise me. I had never given him any reason to think any differently. I felt a brief flash of disappointment. Whether in myself or him, I didn't know. And then I got on with arrangements for my return. In truth, there wasn't much to do. I left the packing up of the shop to Akong, and more or less ran back to the airport. Tenzin and I arrived back in New York, installed ourselves in a bungalow on Dr. Shen's Long Island estate, and immediately set to work. I had shaken off Akong's discouraging words, but I wanted to make sure I didn't disappoint His Holiness the Karmapa. His presence was very clear to me, having just spent months with him. And though I still had no zeal for the project itself, I was truly devoted to him. Quite quickly I remembered that I was good at this kind of organizing work. There was a lot to do. Tenzin spoke very little English, so all the phone calls and meetings fell to me. Eventually, Dr. Shen insisted on paying for intensive private lessons for Tenzin, and he gradually became much more involved as his English improved. But for the first few months, I did everything. Before long, I realized that the rural location was not an ideal place to build. It would make it hard to attract attention for the project of spreading the Dharma. What we really needed, I insisted to Dr. Shen, was a central New York location. It didn't need to be a big place, just somewhere that we could see the project. But it should be easy for potential students to go to. Fortunately, the ever-obliging Dr. Shen could see the sense of this, and he rented us a posh place on the Upper West Side at West 84th Street and West End Avenue. We were 4 blocks from Central Park, and just 1 block from Broadway. It was perfect, and I began to feel that my confidence in my skills had not been misplaced. The day Tenzin and I moved out of the bungalow in Long Island and into the house in Manhattan, I almost had to pinch myself. The next step was to start bringing lamas over. I wrote to the Karmapa and reported that we were almost ready to open. Could he send us some good teachers? He and Dr. Shen arranged for Khenpo Karthar, Bardo Tulku, Lama Ganga, and another Tibetan monk named Jigme, who became our cook, to travel to New York. In those days, Tenzin and I were so hopeless that we could not even cook for ourselves. I knew Lama Ganga and Khenpo Karthar, a particularly renowned scholar and teacher, from my days at Buksa College. We had all been refugees in India, and now here we were, about to open a Dharma center in Manhattan. When I went to the airport to meet them, I saw that Khenpo Karthar, who was in his early 40s by then, was still as skinny as he had been 15 years previously. He had never fully recovered from tuberculosis, which he, like so many other refugees, including my beloved Jamyang, contracted in Baksa. He may have looked frail, but he was a steady and gentle presence from the beginning of our new relationship, and would go on to be one of the most significant teachers in my life. With our city base up and running, Tenzin and I turned our attention back to the land Dr. Shen had bought upstate. It would be wonderful to have a bigger center in a stunning location where we could build a temple as well. But when we began to seriously investigate the costs, it was clear that the location was so remote that the cost and difficulty of constructing a temple would be huge. Dr. Shen did not begrudge the money, but it didn't seem like the most efficient way to accomplish our goal. So we started to look for a more practical and auspicious alternative. In 1976, a year and a half after my arrival in the States, we found it in Woodstock, close to the original site, but more accessible, smaller, and with a beautiful old house already on site. Dr. Shen very obligingly agreed to sell the other land and purchase the property. In 1977, when His Holiness their Karmapa returned to the States, he confirmed that it would be his seat in the West, and blessed the site. Building work immediately began on what would become Karma Triyana Dharma Chakra, KTD. My friend Lama Tenzin Chuni was appointed president of our newly formed center, and I was its general secretary. I was full of satisfaction. Tenzin and I, both young, unequipped, and spoiled, had nevertheless achieved what we'd been set out to do, which was to realize His Holiness the Karmapa's vision in the United States. There was a huge amount of work still to do to establish the center, but I felt that I had played my part. I had proved to Akon that I was up to the job, and that pleased me. In fact, I was rather too pleased with myself. There was an egotistical element to my satisfaction, a sense that I had triumphed and proved my point. This was a sign that although I had done useful work, it had not been with a completely pure motivation. I had wanted to prove my brother wrong, rather than be a vehicle for the spread of the Dharma. And now that I had fulfilled my part of the bargain, I felt entitled to turn my attention to self-indulgence, materialism, and worldly pleasure. Continuing from page 146.
Everything went well in the States. States were both him and that monk. And then of course I had to rush back to Samueling again to get a few things sorted out, and then I had to rush back again. Well, I bet they couldn't wait to get back quick enough. Yeah, so anyway, I mean, if I could look around, I'm sure they discovered that it wasn't an ideal place to build a centre. But as I looked around, I think eventually found something which was good, and Dr. Chen, he bought it for them.
Yes.
You know, it's quite good. And then, of course, his friend couldn't speak English, so I understand why he had to take all the phone calls and everything. You know, that kept him quite busy. You know, and then Dr. Chen, I'm sure saw that, so he needed to learn English, and it set things up for him to learn his English, which was quite good. So it meant that we took some of the load up in Lama Yeshe's work, you know.
Yes.
So that was quite helpful. And it seemed that Woodstock seemed to be quite a good place for a new centre. And of course, you met the big Lama temple, and also part of Rinpoche. And I knew Lama Ganga. I knew Lama. He stayed up at the roundhouse for a while.
It's the same Lama Ganga.
He was a retreat master at Samiling for a while in the loud roundhouse. So we're quite probably the right people to have there for the teachings.
Yes.
You know. And that would have got things going.
Off to a good start.
Off to a good start.
With the people that Karmapa himself had selected.
Yeah.
And wasn't it a blessing that Dr. Shen was there with so many resources that he could direct towards the project, not only to get it funded, but to bring the people that would end up having very, very long commitments and time at KTD and other centers, as you said. Some of them ended up at Samiling also.
Yeah, Dr. Chen was very generous with his money.
Yes.
It wasn't an object, but being a multi-millionaire, I think that the cost of these things wouldn't be that much to him, you know.
Yes. Well, I think coming from an Asian background, he would have seen there would be a connection between his business success and his support for the Dharma. Yeah. Because we've heard that is the way that people in many Asian cultures think. They will engage in their religious activities knowing that the good karma it generates could help them in their everyday materialistic world, in their business.
That's right.
So he certainly would have been having that mindset and also experiencing that benefit from his generosity. Mm-hmm. It works very well for everybody involved, doesn't it? Dr. Shen was able to carry on with his business with the support of the Dharma and the teaching of Karmapa, and all the projects that he funded were able to go forward with his support.
So he eventually met up with Trungpa again.
Yes.
And Trungpa knew the things he liked.
Yes.
So that started off another adventure.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was an amazing story, wasn't it, about the birds going through the airport and the airplane without any detection whatsoever when they were traveling between the US and Scotland.
Yeah. And that's come up as a influence, yeah.
Had you heard the story before?
Yes, I heard about other people saw it was lights.
Isn't that incredible?
They didn't see anything, they saw lights. Yes, I've heard that story before.
It's an amazing story, and it must have been amazing to experience it, because as Lama Yeshe Rinpoche was saying, even he who doesn't get concerned about things was wondering, now, how is this going to go? What's going to happen here?
Yeah.
And it was magical, wasn't it? It was quite amazing.
It's how you can walk through the security, you know, and they see a thing.
Yeah. And the birds didn't make a peep.
No, they kept quiet, yeah.
They must have had a good talking to them before they went through and saying, if you really want to come to India with me, you're going to have to behave.
Yeah, I'm sure he communicated with his birds.
Yes.
He knew them from previous life.
Yes, he would have let them know.
Yeah.
That the reunion was very important, and it would have to. Yeah. It would happen only if they could fulfill certain requirements for getting there properly.
That's right. Yes.
And then they would have joined all the other birds that he had in his very large aviary.
Yeah.
In Rimtech.
That's right. When we quite size that he had it.
Yes.
Because as he was leaving it big enough so the birds have room for flying around, you know.
Yeah, he was sensitive to their needs, even though he had to keep them confined. He wanted them to have as wonderful experience as they could.
That's right.
Within that. And it sounds like he was that way with the people that he worked with as well. He had to keep them confined or keep them under his supervision, but at the same time he gave them a lot of freedom within that to get on with it and do what they needed to do.
Yeah.
He wasn't standing over them telling them what to do at all. He was inspiring them by his example and then letting them find within themselves the qualities they needed to succeed.
Yes, and with him meeting up with Trooper again, I think that would be short-lived. Karmapa still was
Involved.
He had more things in mind.
Yes. Well, certain karmic things keep arising, don't they?
Yeah.
So if a person has been connected or close, they may keep reappearing.
Aye.
It's like that.
His Dharma robes are getting nearer.
Yes.
His Dharma robes are getting nearer.
That's right. And he certainly was having the satisfaction of realizing that he could use his talents and gifts and his training in a very positive way. Because making that center was helping so many people. It gave Karmapa a place to operate out of in North America.
That's his Karmapa's main seat.
That's right.
Yeah, that's his main seat.
In the West.
Aye, in the West.
So this, as you said, this is moving the story forward towards the fulfillment of Lama Yeshe Rinpoche's karma and destiny. And he's getting an awful lot of support from His Holiness Karmapa in the process.
Yes.
And probably Karmapa saw all of this was intended to happen from the start and was just, as you said earlier, playing the cards so that they would unfold and things would be lined up in the proper order and in the proper place.
Yes.
For whatever needed to happen.
Yeah, being New York, there's plenty of people there, so
I
get plenty of customers.
Yes, in the city.
Plenty of customers, aye.
In the city.
Even if they're just curious, that people will be coming.
That's right. So it was a very busy and exciting time.
Yes.
And as you said, it was bringing everything closer to the seeds that were about to ripen. Are you happy with that?
Okie dokie,
Okay.